Hello and welcome to the Berean Voice. I'm Randy Seaver. Today we're going to be looking at Hebrews chapter 4. Before we look at the latter part of that passage, I'd like to at least read some of the verses that we've read before. Beginning in verse 12, we read, "For the word of God is living and operative or effectual and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Neither is there any creature that is hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account." Now, my question for you, having looked at those verses, is this: can you imagine if verses 14 and 15 were not in this text, and we passed immediately from verse 13 down to verse 16? There is no creature that is hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Let us therefore come boldly before the throne of grace, or with confidence before the throne of grace. Now, mind you, this throne would not be a throne of grace were it not for the intervening verses 14 and 15. The throne of grace is only the throne of grace because Jesus is there. Otherwise, this throne that is called the throne of grace would be a throne of judgment. And we would be judged based on what we read in the preceding verses. There is no creature that is hidden from his sight. What the writer is intending to show us here is that we must not be concerned only with outward spiritual declension, but we must be concerned with inward spiritual declension. The psalmist said, "You desire truth in the inward parts." You see, we can control to some extent what we do outwardly. We can be impeccably moral. But the problem is our controlling our thoughts, controlling our motives. We may imagine that our motives are completely pure, but there is one who knows us better than we know ourselves, and he knows when our motives are not pure. He knows when our desires are not what they ought to be. He knows our aspirations. He knows us better than we know ourselves. Can you even imagine coming into the presence of one who knows us in that way, knows us intimately, not in terms of our outward actions, but in terms of our inmost desires, and coming into his presence with boldness? Because apart from the fact that we have a great priest, there could be no boldness in approaching this throne, because this throne would not be a throne of grace. It would be a throne of judgment. Therefore, we must be very thankful for what comes between verses 13 and 16. And this is what comes between. Seeing then that we have a great priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. And then we have two duties. Let us hold fast our confession. In other words, don't go back on what you have professed to believe. Let us hold fast our confession. And verse 16, let us come boldly to the throne of grace. This is our duty. It's interesting the way the old hymn writers talked about boldness in terms of our approach to God. I think it was Zinzendorf who wrote, "Bold shall I stand in thy great day, for who aught to my charge shall lay? Freely absolved through these I am." What? Jesus' blood and righteousness. Fully absolved through these I am from sin and fear and guilt and shame. It is because we have a great priest who has passed through the heavens into the very presence of God that we can come before the throne of God with boldness. Additionally, in Wesley's great hymn, "And can it be that I should gain an interest in the Savior's blood? Died he for me who caused his pain, for me who him to death pursued." And then he goes on to talk about the boldness that we have as we contemplate coming into the very presence of God through the mediatorial ministry of our Lord Jesus Christ. We have lost the concept of coming with boldness because we have a great high priest, it seems. And we think we can come into the very presence of God because we have made a decision for Christ. And we forget about the fact that we can only come into the very presence of God because Christ has come into the presence of God as our representative. Let's not lose touch with that. Let us come boldly to the throne of grace because we have a great high priest. And so we read in verse 14, seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens. The idea is that he has passed through the visible heavens into the very presence of God and continues to be there. He is seated at the right hand of the majesty on high because he has successfully accomplished the work. Who is this one, this great priest that has entered into the presence of God? And the answer is, first of all, he is Jesus. He emphasizes the humanity of Christ by using his human name. He is one who is one in nature with our humanity. He is one who knows what it means to feel the pangs of hunger and thirst. He knows what it is to be weary. He knows what it is to be tested. He knows what it is to be subjected to ridicule. He knows what it is to feel weakness. Jesus, this is the one who is our great priest. As we're going to see, he is one who sympathizes with us. But not only is he one who is one with us in our nature, but he is one with God in his nature, in his essence. This one who is our high priest is Jesus, the Son of God, or God the Son. And because we have a great high priest, the writer tells us that we must hold fast our confession. If we did not have him as our high priest, then we would be overwhelmed if we know anything about ourselves. We would be overwhelmed with a sense of our guilt and our unworthiness and our inability to come into the presence of God. We would understand that what is now the mercy seat would not be the mercy seat at all if it were not for the fact that we have a great priest. Indeed, this seat would be a seat of judgment. Indeed, that's exactly what occurred at the mercy seat. Judgment was passed on all of those for whom the sacrifice was offered. And had it not been for the blood of sacrifice, there would have been no covering over of the sins of the people of Israel. But there was a sacrifice. And what we can thank God for today is that there is a sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice that is of richer blood and nobler name than all those sacrifices of the old covenant. And so he says, seeing we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens into the presence of God, Jesus, he is there in our nature, but he is there as the very Son of God himself. And because of that, he says, don't go back, don't give up, don't go back on your confession. Because we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with us. He is one with us. I don't normally give myself to spending a lot of time on alliteration. I think probably most people who use alliteration ought to spend more time exegeting the text and less time trying to come up with cute alliterations. But these that I want to suggest to you seem to just jump out off the page of this passage. And so let's just talk about them. First of all, the passage would teach us that we have a superior high priest. And that's going to be the message of this epistle, this treatise, for a number of chapters. We have a high priest that is better than the high priest of Aaron, the Levitical priesthood. In chapter 5, he's going to talk about the general characteristics of a priest and show how Christ functions in those characteristics, even though we are told that the Aaronic priest had to offer first sacrifice for their sins and then for the sins of the people. But Jesus, as our priest, does not have to offer sacrifice for his sins because he has none. But we find in the following chapter a description of that priesthood. But what we're going to see is that Jesus is a superior priest to all of those Old Covenant priests. Not one of them was able to come into the presence of God in heaven. He is a superior priest. Secondly, by virtue of the fact that he is a priest, his priest is a substitutionary office. He acts as our substitute. A priest, by his very nature, acted in the place of those whom he represented. And Jesus is our substitute. And he offers himself as a sacrifice for sins. Thirdly, the passage would teach us that he is a successful high priest. He has passed through the heavens into the very presence of God and remains there. In chapter 1, we read that this priest of ours is one who has, after having made satisfaction for sin, sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. This distinguishes him from all of the priests of the Old Covenant. Not one of them had a place to sit down because his work was never finished. He could never accomplish what sinners needed to put them right with God in an everlasting sense. And so this one is a successful priest. He has accomplished the work that the Father gave him to do. Next, he is a sympathizing priest. Look at verse 14. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. The Old King James says, who cannot feel. We do not have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but one who was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Jesus knows what it is to be tempted like we are. He was tempted in all points like we are. Interestingly, the points at which Jesus was tempted are the same points at which Adam was tempted in the garden. One of the vast differences between these two temptations is that one occurred in a perfect environment. The other occurred in anything but a perfect environment. One occurred when Adam had everything he could possibly ever wish for. The other occurred when Jesus was in an hour of great need, having fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and was hungry. The points of temptation are set forth for us in John's first epistle, in which he says, don't love the world or the things that are in the world, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life are not of the Father, but are of the world, and the world passes away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of the Father, he who does the will of God, continues forever. Interestingly, in this passage, he talks about doing the will of God. He who does the will of God. All that is in the world is not of the Father, but is of the world. What he's talking about there is having something contrary to the will of God, enjoying something contrary to the will of God, or being somebody contrary to the will of God. Those were the very temptations to which Adam was subjected. Those are the temptations to which Jesus was subjected. If you're the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. You can have something, but you're going to have it contrary to the will of your Father. You can enjoy something, but you're going to have to enjoy it contrary to the will of your Father. You can be somebody. You can rule over all the kingdoms of the world, but you're going to have to do it contrary to the will of your Father. And though Adam failed in a perfect environment, Jesus succeeded in a completely imperfect environment. He was tempted. He was tested in all points like we are. He knows what we experience. He feels what we feel. He knows our inmost desires. He knows altogether about us. He has been where we are. He understood what it was to be born in a state of humiliation. He wasn't born in a king's palace, but in a stable. He doesn't have myriads and multitudes of dignitaries who are attending him at his birth. He's in a lowly stable. He sits down at the well of Sychar because he was weary with his journey. He was thirsty, and he said to the woman at the well, "Give me something to drink." Jesus was exposed to ridicule. He was exposed to misunderstanding. He was exposed to weakness. He was exposed to weariness. He was exposed to all sorts of difficult trials. He goes to the home of his dear friends, Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and he mourns with them over the death of their loved one. He feels what they feel. What a wonderful thing it is that we have a great priest who is touched with the feeling of our weaknesses. He is not an unfeeling priest. He feels with us. And so he's a sympathizing priest. Not only that, the text tells us that he's a sinless priest. He was tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin. He did not one time disobey his Father in his entire earthly existence. And then finally, the text tells us that he is a supportive and a succoring high priest. Look at the 16th verse. "Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." He is the one who will support us in our most difficult trials. It is because we have this great priest over the household of God that we may come boldly under the throne of grace and say with Zinzendorf, "Bold shall I stand in thy great day, for who aught to my charge shall lay? Freely absolved through these, the blood and righteousness of Christ, through these I am, from sin and fear, from guilt and shame." Our responsibility is to come boldly to the throne of grace. Now look, if you are one of those who has your nose stuck in your navel through morbid introspection, and you're always looking at yourself, I can guarantee you that you will never, ever come into the presence of God. You will never come to this throne of grace and do so with confidence and boldness. If the object of your view is yourself, then boldness is out of the question. Confidence is out of the question. That's why we are exhorted at the very beginning of this chapter to fix our gaze on Jesus. Look to him. Meditate on him. Trust him. Rely on his righteousness. And realize that you have none of your own to plead before the throne of God. Your only hope of being accepted in God's presence is that we have a great priest over the household of God. We have one who has been tempted in all points, tested in all points, like as we are, yet without sin. We have one who is able to sympathize with us. We have one who is able to succor us, to support us in our deepest trials. Look to him. That's the message of the book. Don't stop looking to Jesus. This is why when we come to chapter 12 of Hebrews, we read, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, that is, counting the shame of the cross as an insignificant thing in the light of the glory that was to follow. despising the shame, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Look to him. Fix your gaze on him. That's the message of the book. The problem with the Hebrews was they were looking away from him, and therefore were in danger of apostasy. They were in danger of failing to maintain their confession in him. If you want to be disappointed, and you will be every time, fix your gaze on yourself. I can guarantee you that you are going to be disappointed with your performance. But thank God, our acceptance in the presence of God is based not on our performance, but it is based on his performance. Look to Jesus. Look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. I know what it is to examine oneself and find that you are wanting. I know all about that. I know about evil thoughts. I know about bad motives. I know about all of that. I know about unworthy intentions. And I understand that God knows more about my bad motives. He knows more about my unworthy intentions and so forth than I do. And if you know yourself, then you're going to say the same thing about yourself. You will always be disappointed in yourself in terms of your ability to come with boldness before the throne of grace. You'll never do that as long as your focus is on you. You will only do that when your focus is on Jesus, our great high priest, who has passed through the heavens into the very presence of God, and who is one who is touched with the feeling of our weaknesses, who understands us better than we know ourselves, and one who is able to give us grace, timely grace, in times of need. Well, I hope this has been encouraging to you. I hope that you will, if you have been navel-gazing, that you'll pull your nose out of your navel and look to Jesus, because that is the only way that you will be able to approach the throne of God with boldness. It is because we have a great priest who has passed through the heavens into the very presence of God and remains there because he has been accepted in our place as our representative, that we are able to come with boldness and maintain the confession that we have once made. Well, until next time, may God richly bless you.